View from the Gutters, episode 136. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Trillium, and to skip ahead to the recommendation section, skip to 112.12. View from the Gutters, episode 136. I'm Andrew Chard.
Brant, Gillahan Eddy.
Kit DeForge.
Turbotron 2000.
I'm Kaylee Fleeman.
And I'm Ked Reynolds.
There we go. We made it. We did it.
Wow.
One take.
The intense eye stare really helped.
It helped us go in the right order. I just stare at you until you talk.
I was suddenly so scared. I was just like, shit, what's my name?
You're next. You.
Oh, yeah, you would have totally had the television producer thing.
Yeah,
though,
like,
and if you would have
you.
done
Snap. Now
Oh,
you.
and then you
Now
have like
you.
3, 2, 1 dust too.
Yeah,
like,
I didn't do any of that. I'm sorry.
We can say you did.
Oh, yeah, I definitely did.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that was
They
really
can't
fun.
see you.
We should do that every time.
Yeah, before we get started, though, we've got some episode announcements, including thank you to everybody that said hello at Rose City Comic Con. It was great meeting you all. Even though we recorded this before we left, I'm sure you were all delightful people.
Then if you weren't, we'll be adding an
I'll be
addendum
editing
this.
Like, except for you, Jim. Fuck you.
Jim from Spokane, who came out there just to tell us we're shit.
It was a waste of a 6-hour drive, sir.
I hope it was worth it to you.
And also, thank you to our Patreon episode sponsors.
Yeah, we have Addison Appleby, Becca Lewandowski, Brian May, Brandon Hill, and all of our other Patreon sponsors.
Yes.
And also, happy birthday to Tony Asaro.
Yay!
Aww.
Happy birthday, Tony.
Why does the back of that card say what it says?
Because this is a very old card.
It's an old card, and it was Toby trying to communicate to turn mic levels up and down.
What does the back say?
It says Brant is quiet. I'll be honest,
I'll
that's
just,
not a critique I've received often
hold
in
this
my
up
life.
throughout the entire show, just so
Excellent.
that you can see it and be distracted by it.
It was the live stream giving me information, but since Toby has the computer, like, they typed it to him, and then he held up a card to me, and then that's the super high-tech way we do things around here.
The future is now.
But,
In this room.
Yeah, speaking of the future, we are talking about Trillium this week. And, Kayla, this was your pick, right?
Nope.
It was
Oh,
Turbotron.
was it? Oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So, Kirby. Did you want to talk a little bit about this book? Kind of what made you want us to talk about it?
I have so much to talk about with this book.
Do it.
Because I just really, I don't know, it's one of my favorite books. And I think that, like, one of the biggest things that I really like about it is, like, how it just sort of mirrors itself so much in, like, the way the story is, like, set up. Like, even the cover I have the trade, so it's, like, the front, it's, like, the girl, and she's upside down, and in the back, it's the guy, he's upside down. And
I believe those are the front and back of issue 1.
Yeah, the first issue was done in the flip.
Because in the trade, which I remember talking about this a lot on Top of the Stack, was I wonder how they're going to collect this, because it's all like half pages and you flip stuff over to read it, and I was like, that's going to be so confusing in the trade. But because in the first issue, her story was one way in front of her cover, and then you'd flip the whole book over, and it was like a second book of his story. And you could read them in whatever order you wanted. And I was like, that's really cool. In the trade, they collected it in a set order.
Yeah, and I never read it in the trades because I'm
singles?
not a huge, the singles, because I'm not a huge singles fan because I have so many singles and I
Yeah, they're the worst.
have nothing to do with them.
Put them in a box and put them in the closet.
You
Never
know,
look
I
at them
just,
again.
If I
Force your friends to move them for you.
sometimes I'm like, maybe I should get the like first issue of that one thing that I'm really excited about, and then I get it, and then it just sits on my shelf, and
You
I
gotta
never
tack
look
it
at
on the wall. You gotta have a comic book wall.
I have so many things on my walls already.
Yeah, you do. That's true.
I do. I have a lot.
So
of
many
stuff.
Inuyasha posters.
Hey, those are important.
They are really important.
I mean, I agree with you, but
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's kind of the thing that really made me excited about this. Like, just kind of looking at it in general, is just kind of how, like everything kind of mirrors itself. And like when kind of towards the end where they're talking to the natives, like the blue native are all women, and then you see the natives from like Earth and they're all men, and just kind of like
I didn't even pick up on that.
I didn't pick that up either.
There's a
checked
lot of
it
fun
when
stuff like
That's
that
good.
in
when
there.
I read it. And I don't know, this was like it was a while since I had read it last, and I couldn't remember why it was so sweet, and I remembered when I read it again. And
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
couple of really sweet panels. The one that you showed me before we started was where it's her reaching down to him while he's in the trenches, and then it's mirrored with him reaching down to her while she's a little girl. Like, well, they're both in their moment of most vulnerable, most sad.
yeah,
They reached out kind of like through time to comfort each other. The book was always billed as a romance, like as
Yeah.
an interstellar romance, but it's not romantic love. It's just like a deep understanding and caring, and I think that comes from the title. The reason that they're able to understand each other is because they both ate the Trillium flower together. And it kind of fused their consciousness. They kind of shared, they lived each other's lives, kind of. And then when the time stream gets rewritten, they like almost do actually live each other's lives. And I think it is kind of a commentary on how relationships are based on understanding and compassion. I found that it is not romance in the way that I normally think of romance. It's like a different kind of love.
Yeah, when I first read it, I remember the ending kind of like catching me off guard, where they were kind of like, "We're together in the stars," and I was like, I mean, I thought it was very sweet, but I was kind of like, I kind of feel like that came out of nowhere. But this time reading it, knowing that that's what happened, I picked up on kind of the romantic aspects of it a little bit more.
Well, also too, because they're talking about the black holes, it's like it's going to break us down into our essential atoms, basically, and we'll just kind of be sharing the same space with all of the other star stuff. And I was like, oh, that kind of like makes sense. It kind of mirrors that whole shared consciousness. They're going to like share their consciousness with the universe.
Also, like Carl Sagan and stuff. So
Yeah.
we're all made of star stuff.
Yeah.
They have that whole bit where her mother
Yeah.
is talking to her about that, and she talks about, or Nika talks about being alone and feeling alone in that sense. And I really like that page because after her mom talking about we all die and we join the stars, so we're not alone because there's innumerable stars.
Right.
Her panel just with the black sky and everything else.
Well, as her mom floats away to literally join the stars.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Jeff excels at.
Yeah.
Is that I always prefer him drawing his own story as far as things go, because he's really good at communicating those particular ideas that he puts out there in a very emotional kind of way with his illustrations. And I've heard a lot of people speak to the kind of crudeness or the crude look of his art, but I think that it makes it easier to kind of feel this emotional connection that comes from those drawings that he has, I guess, especially with the watercolors.
Well,
everything's so soft and fragile.
I think with his like slice of life stuff, I very much agree with that. With like Underwater Welder, Essex County trilogy, which are two that I'm like very fond of. With this one though, there's so much action and there's so much kind of like them running, and it's very violent. And there was a question or a comment, I suppose, posed to us on Facebook that basically was saying if they weren't sure that Jeff Lemire was right for the art on this book. And I think the book I would point to is a book like Descender that he's working on with Dustin Nguyen. And that just like, I think that book is absolutely fantastic. And I feel like why that book works as a sci-fi book and as the book that it is because it's two creative minds working together to create a more fleshed out environment. And I really love Jeff Lemire's art. This is not a crack against him, but I wonder if some of those scenes with the action, with the space stuff, with the surreal nature of some of the panels would not have benefited from him working with a different artist on this.
Well, I think that I think that with like Trillium, it's a little bit more like, I want to say like crude, but it's not really crude. It's kind of more like dirty in a sense. Whereas something like Descender, I've only read like the first 3 issues, but
it made me
like,
cry in issue
more
2.
polished.
So.
yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster of Jeff
Yeah.
Lemire. But
And he's a phenomenal writer.
Yeah.
I won't-
Kirby and I commiserate over our like Jeff feelings
Yeah.
pretty frequently, actually.
but like with Descender, like that one has more of like an emptiness to it of like kind of being alone because
Yeah.
he is alone.
Yeah.
And
polished.
I think that like the art in that one definitely fits with the tone a little bit better. Whereas with Trillium, I think it like really works well because you've got kind of like the gritty, like them being on Earth, like in the 1920s, and you know they have like dirt and stuff, and then like her kind of in like a sickly state of the future, you know, looking for these things. So I think it works well.
Yeah, I think parts of the story work really well with this. I think the more slice of life components of the book, where it's like kind of the daily routine of what's going on, especially when she is living in Victorian England.
Oh, yeah,
like, what's going on, sister? Where's mother? That kind of stuff. Like, I think that works really well as Jeff Lemire. But there are some chase scenes and some, you know, the high action ending of like, oh no, we lost part of a rocket booster and we have to go out in space to repair. And I want that to be like Apollo 13 or like,
Prometheus.
I don't. Yeah, Prometheus is a
It's
better example.
Prometheus,
I was
yeah.
like, I don't want to use the Bruce Willis movie where they drill into the asteroid.
Armageddon.
Armageddon. I don't want to use that as an example, but it kind of made me think of
I
that.
don't want to close my eyes.
I don't
wanna
want
fall
to
asleep.
fall asleep.
Yeah.
But I mean, like that high action ending, I almost wish had the punch of a different style.
Jeff himself, actually, I went and did some reading on this too because I feel so fond about his interviews too. He spoke pretty early on about this book, about his own like severe apprehension of like, I'm really going to be pushing a lot of things I'm not comfortable with doing. And on one end, although I can totally understand and respect where maybe another artist could have been beneficial for a story like this, I've got to commend him for jumping into something that he actively knew he wasn't comfortable,
Yeah, that's
100% sure he could do. And he's, I wish I could find my little note for this. I'm sure it's somewhere. It's an attitude he's had that has served him well in the past. He went up for a YALSA award. He got 2 different, two different Schuster awards. I think he's gotten like 5 or 6 awards since like 2008 or something, just for his books where he has been pushing himself a lot more since Essex County. And that's something that I really, I'm very proud of him.
Yeah, and I think it's always
That
great to
little
see
baby.
an artist like stretch their boundaries and push and grow because, I mean, that's what great artists have to do to make it to the next level, you know? And yeah, I really can commend anyone for kind of going outside of their comfort zone. And I really like parts of his art in this book. I love the watercolors. Like this, because I love Essex County, but it is black and white.
Yeah, it's
I
just
almost
ink.
wish that it was watercolored too, because after seeing this and just like how great watercolors look over his art, I was like, oh, because it reminds me of Sweet Tooth a lot, which is I think where he started coloring like this, which is a book I was super excited about as it was
Very
coming
fond of
out.
that.
I'm fond of that, and I think his style fits that book so well.
What's fun about the watercolors, too, just in regard to this being a science fiction story, is that it's an artistic combination that I feel is relatively unexpected. Because, again, our idea of science fiction is evidenced by, you know, the capitalism all around us of Apple
Right.
and everything else is shiny,
Sleek.
white, plastic,
Yeah.
chrome, you know,
Yeah.
let's do this in a computer, do it digitally, oh my God, lens flare and all that shit.
Right.
And to do something in a more traditional manner like this, for something that's very much about human emotion and human evolution, not just for the characters, but the changes in time that we experience as human beings.
Right.
And our own kind of emotional timeline. I think it's really, it's really compelling to see watercolors in a science fiction story like this. Because there's always this idea, we always love to tell these sci-fi stories of the loss of our humanity or how a glorious past was so much more special to us and everything. But I think it knits everything together in this sense of people needing the same things.
Yeah, like
throughout
humanity
time.
hasn't really changed that much despite technology. Like we are still people who can be compassionate of other people, and we still have a lot of the same fears and feelings of loss. Like the stuff that he goes through in the war, it leaves a real void in him. Even his brother is like, you've not been the same since the war, as it would affect many people. And the loss of her mother leaves a very similar void, even though they are thousands of years apart, that humanity hasn't really changed that much. I love that. I love the writing of this story. I love the concept of this story. I think for every sci-fi story there is of like shiny, sleek Star Trek whooshing doors, there are equally as many like gritty, the future is not so great. Whoever controls the spice type stuff. And I think
A more future that is realistic. Well, realistic as we would think of our world.
Yeah. Something like Firefly or Blade Runner or something where it's like, it's the dirt. They didn't polish all the dirt off of the past. Like,
It's a gross
But this is
future.
different.
Yeah.
'cause
Human
it's
beings are
earthy.
still being human beings.
Right, yeah.
Like it's not just dirty brown sci-fi, I think, which is what, again, color choice and medium choice is
Right.
interesting to me in this, because there's so many bright colors and earthy, earth-derived colors in a science fiction book. And I think that's really theme-wise it's interesting too. And again, if the title of the book is Trillium, it's a beautiful, plant. We've got them all over the Pacific Northwest. That it ties us directly to the planet, to the Earth,
Right.
and these color choices reinforce that idea. And furthermore, even just with the Trillium concept itself, you are not supposed to pick Trillium, like actual Trillium biologically, because it will kill the plant.
Right.
To be picked, it takes forever for it to try to regenerate, and having that be this critical element in the survival against the call.
Right.
In that is this idea that this soft and fragile, beautiful thing is necessary to survive.
Right.
Just like, the weakness of, or perceived weakness of our emotions, our feelings, our fears is what we need to survive as human beings.
Yeah.
And gives us hope.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the call as the enemy was really smart too. The enemy, quote unquote. I mean, the enemy is it's in their minds, man. No, but I mean, it would be easy to be like, they were at war with the alien race, the whatevers, and like that battleship shows up at the end kind of thing. But instead, just having like an empty colony ship that's like, well, it's gonna spread the plague. It's like they call it a sentient virus.
Yeah.
But essentially, I'm assuming it's basically just a virus.
Which apparently will survive even in the vacuum of space, which is one of my small complaints about the idea.
It's the
we can
water
just blow this
bears.
up.
It's a super virus.
Super duper virus.
Yeah, right. I think that was a smart choice too, because to have to relay enough information about an alien species or a faction of humanity that they're warring with would take up necessary page space that he's spending on more important elements of the characters. I think adding the one native race of blue people was enough to show you that the galaxy is vast, but he didn't have to spend as much page space on it, because the book feels dense, and it's only 8 issues. So
I thought it was longer. Like when I looked at it again, I was like, oh.
yeah.
But that
can
goes
breeze
back
through
to
this.
that goes back to Kirby's mirroring, though, is that having this having the I can never pronounce it right, like Athabians or something like that is what they called the race. Having them purposefully somewhat vague, I think, was intentional to mirror the native tribe that they were seeing when William was exploring the ruins at the beginning of the book. Is they're also pretty vague. The only information that you get about these so-called natives or foreigners is that they value this trillium flower, that these ruins are sacred to them, that that this flower is a huge part of their culture and their life for some specific reason. And I think that's all about the book flip. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I think that's meant to be vague to kind of keep it, with this sort of plot line of not super explained native people and just more the element, I guess.
I think it also mirrors the humanity hasn't changed that much type
Yeah.
approach.
Because the
where it's like-
colonialization.
exactly. Where it's like,
Or
oh, these
colonialism.
European colonials are quote unquote discovering places, and these space explorers are like discovering these
And Pole's
Yeah.
deceptiveness mirrors
Right,
in
exactly.
both sets of time.
Exactly.
You know?
It's
There
like,
were-
yeah, I don't know. It's that kind of discovery that's like, oh, I walked into my neighbor's garage and discovered his lawnmower, and now it's mine because I saw it first. And I think that he does a good job of kind of showing that's what's going on still, and the fact that William and how do you pronounce her name?
Nika.
Nika.
Yeah.
Share a similar experience as. Although I like that she's a scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that's an important part of the story. But anyway, Brant, you look like you were going to say something when I was talking about nothing. Just talking about nothing.
Oh, you were making the comment about like the plague as
Oh yeah,
not giving it a certain amount of
it was
concrete detail on that
Yeah.
that safe space because he was spending the space doing something else. And I don't know.
Do you think he didn't give enough information about the plague of the creep, or were they a necessary part of the story, or not? I mean,
Well, I think that one of the things that I notice about this book is that it feels to me like a kind of a mishmash of a lot of concepts that I've seen in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also that, so like there, and whether or not that's intentional or not, I think is interesting. Like, is he trying to make nods to a lot of other science fiction tropes and genre pieces that have approached at least pieces of this story? Is that intentional? And then there's the
Probably.
vagueness. I would assume,
Yeah.
probably.
The end was 2001.
Right.
pretty
Yeah.
much.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and funny enough, there are elements of Prometheus, and
yeah,
I did read one person was like, and native blue people living on a planet that humanity doesn't understand. That
Yeah.
would be Avatar. Thank you. And I'm like, I
yeah.
don't know about that
Ferngully,
one.
I saw that movie.
I think
Yeah,
from what
probably.
I read, yeah.
And so there's that whole thing where it's like, okay, how much of an intentional homage is this, or is it just like you've been so inundated with the, is he a big sci-fi fan and he's been so inundated he doesn't even realize what well he's pulling from? I'm going to go on a limb and say that he wasn't doing it with a lack of intention.
Yeah,
But then, like, to counter offset that with vagueness about certain concepts, I don't know. So here's the big reason I don't know. I've never read Jeff Lemire.
right. This is your first.
This is my first Jeff Lemire book.
Ooh.
I've only heard of him,
Yeah.
And so I feel like I have the same problem with this book that I think people do who enjoy film that, would watch a Martin Scorsese film, like the 15th Martin Scorsese film, right? Like there are things that I think as fans of an artist, you begin to discern about that artist,
Yeah.
right? Like Kit was talking about, like she knows his struggles, she knows about him, she knows what his art is intending and all of these things. So she has a more informed eye reading this piece than I do. So I come into it, I'm just kind of like, that's kind of strange. Like, and to some extent, like, I guess, do I give a shit that he pushed his boundaries? Like, good for him
Right.
on one hand, but as a consumer of the material, like, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
And I would have preferred maybe a different artist because everyone looks like a heroin junkie to me in this film, which I mean, I guess is fitting for some of them because they're sick from intergalactic wasting sickness, basically. But
It's just how he draws people.
But it's so that's the thing is that it's like I don't find that appealing as a universal style. The watercolors are really interesting, but I'm not a big fan of the sketch look, and so I find myself being like, so it's like Kit and I could be sitting literally a foot and a half away from each other, and she'd be like, oh, he's it's so dynamic, he's trying really hard, it's so different than what he's done before, and I'm like, eh.
Almost
Yeah.
within smacking distance.
Yeah, almost.
Not the, no.
So there's that. There's the callbacks to these other science fiction things where, and there's tons of successful media combines the ideas of different threads of
Well,
things.
I
and makes
think
compelling stories.
Modern
and-
art is remix art.
of course.
At the base level, I think.
And I just find myself kind of walking away from this book being like, I guess what I'm worried about and what I haven't quite settled on is sometimes vagary can be used as a way of claiming that something is deep when it really just wasn't explained. Where it's like, oh, it's so open to interpretation. Like it's about like how we feel unknowing about the universe. And I'm like, yeah, he just didn't actually want to write the extra paragraph and is hoping that you'll think it's good, not. And so I don't know.
So do you think that about the call? Do you feel like they're not well
so,
developed?
like, when you said about the call, I was like, I don't know. Like, do I really need to know a lot about a space virus? Probably not.
Right, exactly.
But
I
then,
think
but
that's why I
then,
used it.
then the conversation switched to like knowing a lot about the aliens, and I'm like, did I find that problematic? The Abithians, is that what we agreed on?
The blue guys.
The blue guys. And it's like,
Scientific
do I
name.
care that I don't know a lot about them? I'm like, well, not really. And then I start finding myself being like, but this is an entire race of people who live with the knowledge that this plant does something. Probably, well, and at least by the time the book ends, they seem to know exactly what it does, which is why they seem so like, oh, that's what you guys were doing, and are talking to them and trying to help them. And it's like,
Right.
how does an entire race of people exist with something like that and not like then whoops to human? Like there's like the primacy of humans, like they happen to like it's weird. Sorry, I'm like really
Okay, you're
disjointed.
Yeah. So first
I
thought,
getcha.
the race of blue guys has the flower, and they know it's important,
Right.
But they're not sharing that with everyone else. Is that the
Well,
issue?
it's not so much that they need to share it, but it's that thing where we're told nothing about them. We don't know what the relationship to the flower is, except to know that they seem to understand its properties,
Right.
And they seem to have at least some technology that either harnesses it or captures some essence of its function,
Yeah.
right? Like the temples and stuff play a role in that, and we are led to assume, at least, that those temples are a function also of their society and their prowess. But if a theme that we're talking about in this thing is Europeans showing up and making things happen, like, hey, this is mine, isn't it then also weird that the only reason like shit breaks down between realities and it's got to be dealt with is because the only two white people in the world in the universe happen to show up and start eating this thing when
And
they weren't
fucked
supposed to,
everything up.
right? It's like that seems weird to be like, like making a nod towards, isn't it strange how people just think that they are the main driving force for change?
Well,
and then they are the
I think
I don't know.
I'm talking more about the fact that like, you have European settlers coming over and being like, oh, we're going to
Right.
help civilize this culture that knows nothing. But then in reality, it's like, well, wait a minute. Actually, they knew a lot
Are they
of
learning
they-
from
Right.
Yeah, they have
people?
like tons of culture and like an amazing, rich history and science and, all this. And I think that that's mirrored by them going to this race of blue aliens and being like, they're just like hanging around with these flowers and these dumb temples. Get out of here. We're trying to wage a space war against the virus, man. And then it's
Yeah.
like, oh, wait, actually, they had the secret to everything. We were just too dense to figure that out.
That's
Right.
something.
That's the theme that I picked
Or
up
our
on. I
cultural
don't-
Yeah,
values led
I
us
picked
to-
up on that too. And one thing, one thing that this is something that maybe Brant might not have experienced because he hasn't read other Jeff Lemire books, but I think kind of like people coming in and taking things from natives is kind of a theme that he comes up with a lot. Like it's really
Canadian.
prominent in Sweet Tooth.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Like-
I sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
it's okay. That was pretty much it. Just I'm
It
glad
is a
that other
theme.
people picked up on that because I thought I might have been like
No.
reading way too much into it when like I came up with that. But
I mean,
yeah,
I think there's
he
a
really
reason he shows the native people that William fights with. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's just so that he can use pyramids. Like, I
Right.
don't think it's as shallow as that.
Well, I
Right.
think that he also is like really interested in like native culture too, because I was trying to look stuff up to like back up my theory, and I didn't know this about him, but he did like Teen Titans, and he made Raven a Native American,
I
like
didn't know
when he wrote it. So I think that he has some sort of connection to them, but I'm not sure exactly what it is.
He's
'cause
Canadian, right?
He's
yeah,
Canadian.
he's
Yeah.
Canadian, and there's
He grew up in Essex County.
Yeah.
yeah. There's
Which is
still
a surprise
they
to
would
everyone.
be, First Nations people in Canada.
There's
Yeah.
still actually a lot of concern, well, just like there is in the U.S., as far as treatment of Native issues in Canada.
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
they just closed some of the Indian schools that they've still had,
Right.
like within the year.
Yeah.
This isn't like a distant problem for them.
Right.
So I would think and I would wonder, at least culturally, if that isn't something that maybe he's seen or heard.
Oh, I'm sure.
You
Yeah.
know, in his life, I'd be curious to know.
It's
But-
something a very North American experience that, like, it isn't really an experience in Europe because it's still so recent in our history.
Yeah.
The mistreatment of Native people in the North America.
Of course, they'll ask others, and it was years ago. Why are
Right.
we still upset about it? No.
It's like just happened, and so it's still it's a very North American thing. So I do think it comes up in his writing a lot.
Yeah.
I think the tension for me so I tread carefully with this because I don't tend to be this kind of thinker about things, but it seems that there's if actually it being mentioned that Lemire has an interest in native topics actually makes me even more skeptic of this book than less, because then I'm thinking to myself, we're talking about a science fiction story in which the natives are intentionally not as sophisticated, even though they clearly have all of the answers to the conundrum at play. And so I guess, and this is where I think science fiction, depending on your...
What makes them not as sophisticated?
Well, so they're presented in a way that they're at least perceived as simpler beings,
but that's,
right?
I think, intentional.
Yes, I think that is intentional. What I think when my brain starts to get a lot of friction in it, I'm not sure how to resolve is they know what this flower does. They have technology that's meant to harness and or circumnavigate its effects or function within it.
Right.
And yet these two people are given an opportunity to carte blanche fuck everything up through their weird parallel wandering through the universe. And like these beings have to be approached, and then they're like, "Oh, well, you were doing what?" And that seems, and I guess where this runs into a weird grounding for me is in the science fiction part. Like there is a trend that sometimes might be critiqued, which is a version of the European colonists make things happen thing, which is, oh, things are fine until humanity shows up and either fucks things up or fixes things that nobody else could basically figure out. And it seems weird to me that if you're a sophisticated alien race that has access to this power and knows about it and knows what it does, that you'd be like, whoops, crazy.
Well, we have a lot of Blue do more learning, too. Like, we have a lot of alien stories where you have this supposedly really sophisticated race, and it's all about, like, helping the weak, sad, pathetic little Earth people learn and grow.
Sure.
Who think like toddlers,
Vulcans.
that they know everything about what they're doing.
Right. Yeah.
And they may have more toys, they may be shinier, they may have bigger guns, but there's this whole, again, hippy-dippy mindset that a lot of science fiction in the 60s rode this hard. Where it was like, hey man, you can have more of the shit, you can have the bigger colony, you can have the fancier ships, but what really matters, man, what's really evolved, man, is connecting yourself, man. And that's where you get like with these like native connections, or the connections to the native tribes on Earth during this exploration. I find it kind of fun and funny where I sort of understand what Brant's saying here, as far as like, you've got this veneer of primitivism on these aliens, you know, to make them mirror with the Native Americans on Earth. And this whole pyramid thing with the mouth of God being depicted as this sort of Incan, Mayan looking, you know,
which is very
again,
tribute to
like
the
a very
gods.
Earth
yes.
Mother.
That whole Earth Mother, like old mythology mindset that we keep finding in, you know, all of these histories, all these ruins in, you know, since the history of everything. And, you know, the depiction of these mythological gods, or the mindset we have of old gods and things like that, as primitive, I think somewhat colors how we decide whether these natives are being portrayed with primitivism. That sounds really weird, but essentially they've been telling them from the get-go with these paintings, with everything on these, on the pyramids. You have hints of what's happening plot-wise throughout this entire book, both through the codes, which I don't know if anyone translated the alien language.
Ain't no one got time for
because
that.
if you do, they tell you the plot. The aliens will be telling you what they need to do, what the plot is, why. And it's, again, oh, well, I don't really understand. You know, I'm the people who showed up here. I don't really get you. I sort of have the translation software. Nika, again, from the beginning goes, give me some more time so I can understand what they're saying. We're trying to break ground here.
Well, she's making first contact with them. And that was one of the things I wanted to bring up.
Well, she's had a
Brant.
few contacts with them at that point.
This is their first interaction with this alien race, and the commander is basically like, you broke every first contact protocol. And it's where I feel like it's the veneer of painting the blue aliens in a primitive light, but it is like they show up, Nika goes to them, and they're like, here's how Trillium works. Look, you can travel through time, and it's a doorway to the pyramids and like here's everything you need. Like
It's
we
really
are
cool, have
sharing
fun, whatever.
we're sharing all
Which
this
means
with
they
you.
must have done it themselves and have
Right.
some understanding of
And
where
Nika's
they
not
want
the
to be.
one who fucks it up. It's literally the commander who's not there going, fire all the rockets, which
And not respecting the
Yeah.
culture's knowledge in the first place.
is
And
maybe the one problem I have with the book is just like she is such a one-note character,
Yes.
the
Oh,
commander.
absolutely.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
well, it's the same thing with William's brother.
Yeah.
Well, William's brother gets a little bit more development along. The commander is there to be an obstacle,
Yeah.
and that really bothers me. Like, yes, she has motivation in that she wants Trillium to save humanity, and that would be a really good motivation, but she is so one note,
Yeah.
and she is just so, like, unnecessarily forceful and, like, unnecessarily, I guess, confrontational. Like when she meets William's brother and just starts punching him, like,
Yeah.
why would that work? She's supposed to be a commander. She's supposed to have all these like first
Right.
contact protocols that she knows. And they're to punch the thing until it starts speaking her language. Like that doesn't make sense.
When she's like, "Oh, I do have the translation now." He's saying, "I don't know what's going on." She pulls a gun and is like, "That's not good enough." And it's like, what is wrong
like
with you,
why?
lady?
Why would that be? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a problem with her characterization, and I also feel like both William's brother and she go through no character development.
I feel like William's brother goes through a little bit, just because to me, he really, really, really wants William to get better. He wants his brother back. And that, again, is a really good motivation, but he comes off as one note. And it's towards the end when he is like, he sacrifices himself to save them.
But he does that at the beginning, too, though.
Like he
yeah,
gets
but
the
he-
redemption that Pole doesn't. Pole's
Right.
Pole's
Yeah.
redemption is redacted. I think is what Kaylee's saying is that like William's brother gets some opportunity to kind of do something noble and good and everything. And I find it really disappointing that when they seemed like they were developing Commander Pole into a more sympathetic character in this alternate timeline, it was like, lol, just kidding, it was all a lie.
Right.
And that's, again, that just reinforces one note.
But I think that's the problem with, like, that's what I mean by character development. I think it was Adam that said this on the show. There's, like, a character development, he defines it as if a character would make different decisions, would choose a different decision to the same problem at the beginning. I did not say that well. If at the
a
beginning...
character at the end of the book would make a different decision
There
than the
you go.
character he was in the beginning of the
That's
book.
the one. There you go. So I think that William's brother doesn't. He makes the same decisions at the end of the book that he made at the beginning, which is like, no, William, run! I want you to be okay. I'm gonna sacrifice myself for you. He does it twice. He does it again. And I think Kirby's right. I think that's mirroring. I think it's intentional, and I think that is. But I think it's unfortunate that you sacrificed character growth on a few characters
to create the mirror.
Right.
Yeah, I think that might come back to the root of what bothers me about the book is that I feel like there are so many things that are because they need to be, because that's what they want them to be. And that's true of every story. We've talked about this before, but there's a difference in how well that like the feeling of that execution changes whether or not something feels, I guess, organic versus forced.
Right.
And maybe it's a reflection of the fact that this is something that's testing Lemire's limits. So he's pushing himself harder, so he's not able to access that organic sensation in the same way that he was in other stories with other topics. But it's like, oh, how convenient. Like, it's like there's a million sci-fi stories where you don't understand the aliens. Whoops. Like there's a million stories where it's like time and space are not really how man, absorbs that information. And, oh, look at the crazy humans grappling with that. 2001, oh, the ships are going to come out of that. I'm going to sacrifice myself for you, brother. It's like, yep. And yeah, because there's not a sense of organicness about those characters, because so many things feel like, why is it that way? Because it is.
But are those important to the story, though?
Well, I
wonder if why it feels so familiar is because he painted you a very familiar picture for you to have a good framing device, to just be like, here you go, you know what all this stuff is like, here's what space is like, you remember space travel and blue aliens, you know all this, because at the root, at the end of the day, this is a story about two specific people.
Sure.
And I don't know that is a good enough excuse for the complaints that you're having, but I feel like it's possible that this was meant to be a character study, and he used very familiar settings
You
to do that.
might be right, but there's a problem I have with the central premise that I think is reflected with my setting premise. My problem with the setting premise, which is, I feel like the central premise is hat is hung on the notion that knowing is intimacy. That to know someone that completely is to then be connected to them. And I don't know that I agree with that.
It is a level of connection. I mean,
absolutely.
like, that's what I opened with, is like, I don't know that it's
Right, and
it's billed
and I
as,
agree with you
but-
that I don't know that it's necessarily intended as a out and out romantic story. It's meant to be something about intimacy beyond that, although there are shades of romanticism in it. But I think if the central premise is that you knowing is what makes you passionate or interested or desire or seeking of something, and
Why
then
would
it's
he choose ignorance?
right, and then you're setting it in
Yeah.
a setting of like relying on, you know these things, I don't have to explain
But
them.
I don't agree with you that that's what he's saying. I don't think he's saying like that it is what draws them together interest wise. It is what draws them together passionately. I think it's they understand each other because they've been in each other's heads, and now that gives you empathy towards someone. Like, knowing someone is what makes you care about them, and not in a way that is like, the electric spark of romance and love and compassion. Is just like, she worries about him being alive still because they have a connection. And I think that's true with your friends, with people you've known for a long time, or long-term relationships or whatever. And I think that is in direct relation to the concept of, even in the year 39, whatever, you can still connect with what happened, with the way that people felt and thought thousands of years ago. There's a real problem in the study of history, and it's pervasive, and it's problematic, but it's also like, you do it unconsciously, which is, a lot of historians will unconsciously assume that they're more clever than ancient people. And it's not intentional. It's not meant to be like, those dumb people in the past. But it's basically like the thought process that if you were in their shoes, you would have done it differently because, I mean, you have a better education and you're more clever and all of that. And I think that is a real problem. And so for me, thematically, I like the idea that even in the future, you can connect with someone so strongly in the past, and they're not that different than you are.
Yeah, and I think if that was the soul connection upon which some of these things moved, I would be more mollified. But there's that intensity that rises where it's like, my reality has shifted and I'm anchored to this one person because I so intently am connected to them. And
yeah, they shared that's what I think. That's
They
what
ate
the
the
art
flower.
is.
No, I understand.
They flowered together.
Dude.
I get that. But
Yeah.
but again, it feels to me like, why is it that way? Because it's that way. Like, because Trillium is not developed as a concept, because we don't know who the race is, we don't know what is even the point of that thing existing. Like, because those things are left in obscurity, then I don't have a strong connection to the fact that it causes them to be connected. What I'm told is that makes them connected, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
but why do I care about that? And again, like, that might not be a problem for some people. For me, it just creates for me a distance from the story. I'm not drawn into that intimacy, so I don't find it compelling. I find myself then being not connected enough to be like that, like, well, then why are you doing that? Like, why is that
Maybe you're
character
busy
doing
asking
that?
the questions then that you don't have the answers to.
Right.
You're busy going, okay, why is this flower the cure for the thing with the call?
Why
This
is why
don't I have that answer?
Yeah, and
Why
it's-
is it important?
And I think that's the thing, is that there's plenty of books, novels, comics, graphic novels, movies where I'm not provided with answers, and I could care less because of the way it's presented and the way that it invests me. And maybe this is something that would have fit for me better as a film, where things like ambiance and music and things could have drawn the emotional connections that I don't have visually because of my nature.
And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, the difference between film and comics, too, because the beginning of this feels very cinematic. It feels like I could be watching a science fiction film. Until the moments when you start to have language barrier breakdowns. And then I feel like it starts to do something really well that only comics can do. that film can't do because of sound, and that is like you're reading it in English, but you're understanding that they don't understand each other. Like, but I mean, like one of those two would have had to have subtitles, but because it opened with her in space, it would have been weird for her to like be speaking a different language, I feel like. And so the panels where she's speaking in English and all his words are just dash lines, and then you flip that, is where it reminds me like, oh, this is why this works as a comic. It's still using the comics medium well.
I feel like there are films and shows that have played with that and used it successfully.
I'm sure you could.
You know,
It just felt like
Wall-E.
a very comic
What was
book
that?
thing.
Wall-E.
Wall-E, yeah.
Yeah, but it just,
You can chuckle, but I'm serious.
No,
Wall-E.
I
I
agree.
mean, even Apocalyptica and Passion
Yeah.
of the Christ use
Right.
that mechanism to evoke
Yeah.
a sense of difference with emotional connection. And
right.
yeah, I mean, like I'm not sitting here trying to crap on this book. Like I definitely think it's worth looking at. I think I just am not as
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
that's-
like I kind of walk
that's
away from
fine.
it
I'm
being
not trying to
like,
convince you to love
no,
it.
no. I think I'm just
Well,
trying to articulate outside.
these are real
of me.
questions though, as far as like how you're going to approach a plot like this too. It's like you made a good point of like if this was your first book with him and you didn't really know what to expect about some of these kind of things, you would have certain expectations as a reader regardless, I think, of any like
Yeah.
what comic, regardless of the comic we pick. You would have certain expectations in how a story is told, how effectively a story is told, what sort of emotions are able to be communicated by the story. And if it required a familiarity with that person's way of doing things, how effective is he being in his storytelling? That's a real thing to think about. Is if this is your first Jeff book, it
Right.
may not make... it may not be right for you because of all these holes that he's leaving.
Well, and I think,
It depends, really.
I think for, anyone who's aspiring to write and draw comics, like, I think this is a great example of, like, what creative growth looks like. And that sometimes you don't always hit the mark 100%.
Well, and that you don't please everybody, and that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, you still keep making stuff even though the possibility for failure is there, in that knowing that, oh, I know this is going to be stretching what I'm doing, but I have to do it because I'm a creative person and I have this idea, I have this story that I want to get out.
Absolutely.
And maybe it was a case of not having anyone to draw for him, and he was like, well, fuck it, I'll do it. That happens, So,
Well, I mean, clearly based on some of the comments that I've heard here, like he was testing out a lot of different things, the coloring and the layout. I will concede that probably one thing that really hurt my ability to get into this book was that even in the graphic novel, it's, we were talking about how it's laid out, how it was laid out in its single trades, but
Yeah.
there's even an issue or one of the chapters in the graphic where
you have to
it's
turn the
It's
We have to
very
turn the book
difficult
around.
to actually
and
stay engaged with the
I
book in that
don't
respect.
want to do that.
Oh, but that's part of the fun. That's one of the reasons I like it so much. Is like it's interactive. So
Right. I mean, and that's the thing is that I think that just like there are films, like I'm an incredibly passionate fan of film scores. I think that they make a complete difference in how a film is
absolutely.
absorbed. And I know for a fact that there are people who are like, who I could say, wasn't it amazing that they used this score? And they're really like, what? I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
Like, and
The fact that they didn't notice is probably your point.
well, I mean,
If the score is well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I
That's
think,
true,
I think, well, that may be true. I think that's also the thing where it's like, we're all creatures of multiple senses, and how we prioritize them. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to suggest, that proves that we all learn this differently, we all absorb differently, and so by that very nature, Curbotron here may get a lot of value out of tactile experience, and I no,
It
I
can
don't
be a
want
very
it.
divisive decision.
Right.
To, like format can be a huge barrier for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Even for something as silly as like I was doing this reread and I did have a moment where I felt a little weird about people looking at me turning a book completely upside down like I don't know what I'm doing. And it was just a sudden little self-conscious moment of like, I hope people think I'm not too stupid to figure out how to read.
You're like a librarian. They're like, what you doing?
Doesn't she work at the library?
But like some people won't watch films that have subtitles in them.
Oh,
for that
yeah,
very reason.
absolutely.
It's like I don't want to have to read. It's like I don't want to have to turn the book over.
Or it's as simple
I
as
don't
like
want
I
to
had
stop playing Minecraft long enough to read what you're saying.
Exactly.
Or, like I had a really hard time watching Avatar, right? James Cameron said it had to be watched in 3D. Well, I wear glasses. It's really hard to watch 3D with glasses on, and it was a pain in the ass. I ultimately actually agreed that the only reason that movie was worth watching was watching it in 3D because it was so different than anything else I'd experienced.
Right.
So I'm able to give it plaudits for being a completely unique movie-going experience. And so I can understand that people who watched it without that experience are like, it's garbage,
Yeah.
Or even who did see it and don't find that stuff interesting were like, it's garbage.
Yeah. I think I had a similar experience of Kit because I was reading it in a comic book store today and just started like flipping a book over and was like, I feel a little strange about this now, but oh well, we'll get over it.
That was one aspect I didn't like, but I could see how for some readers having to turn it for your body to realize you're now in a different time could be useful, but it was not my cup of tea.
I like the one where you turn it vertically. And it like the page because like the panels kind of like rotate around and like as you're reading it, you're like turning it. I thought that was really clever.
I found that one actually way more interesting than
than just flip. Well, and it also has the awkward formatting problem where when you read that issue in the singles, it was laid out exactly the same. So you'd read the top half and then you flip it over and you'd read the bottom half and then you're done. But in this format, you read the top half, flipped it over, read the bottom half, and then you had to flip forward like 15 pages and go like, where was I? Like it just it felt like this book was intended to be laid out in the singles, and something I said every week on Top of the Stack was like, I wonder how they're going to collect this because it is such a unique experience in the singles.
And I guess for me, if it was a big priority, they would have made like the fact that they were willing to at least unravel some of those format changes to lay out the graphic in a specific way makes me feel like it was less of a priority to the story than it was more of a little bit of a gimmick. That's not to say that it was like I read people who were like straight up like it's a gimmick, it's fucking worthless. There's no reason to do it, and I'm like, me being the very moderate person that I am, I'm like, well, I don't know that that's completely true. Like, I think that there can be a lot of. I mean, the whole point of graphic media is to play with both the narrative and the visual aspects. So I think it's important if you have a strong theme that you're trying to communicate, then you try using it.
And people use that same example when it comes to 3D, like you were talking about earlier. Like, is 3D just a gimmick?
Sometimes.
Or is it the wave of the future, like they keep telling us?
Please no.
Yeah.
I used to think it was the wave of the future, and now I'm just like, do we have to see it in 3D?
It's $9 more.
Yeah.
And it's not that much better.
Well, it's all about implementation.
No,
right?
I totally
that's the
understand.
problem.
Yeah.
Well, this formatting issue has piqued my curiosity. Who read this as a digital medium?
I had to do it because somebody had my copy of it.
Then I guess
somebody else didn't read it in time.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Well, actually, so the funny thing is, though, is I grabbed your copy as we were talking in the beginning,
that's why I
specifically
wanted
to
to
see if
ask
I was going to
that.
find myself as irritated as I was on the screen. And frankly, I was more irritated with the physical copy because at least digitally, I could flip. I was reading it on a static monitor. I could flip it myself much faster.
Yeah.
That was
entire
my
computer.
question. Actually,
This is me on the couch on my computer.
Like an iPad wouldn't have been so bad, I guess. But I mean,
Yeah,
I think I had the same
honestly.
issue that I had with the book. Actually, probably maybe that would have been like the
I was like
perfect
holding it so I could,
format
like,
for me
click.
is an iPad type device.
Yeah.
Because then I could have had the convenience of digital that I enjoy, and it would have felt easier because the double layout book, turning it in my hands. I think that was that when I was doing it at the beginning of the show. While everyone else was talking, I was just like, "Fuck that! I'm not doing that."
Well, I bring this up for that reason of you talking about format and everything else. Is that I was curious to know if I don't use e-readers, for example, of any type or tablets. I was curious to know if in your reader there is a simple function, just like with Image Viewer, where you just boop and you press a button and it flips.
Yep.
If that's the case, how do you think that would affect the reading experience for someone versus twisting a book around? Like how important would it be to preserve the physical act of doing something like that and reading the book?
Well,
we've had this discussion
when
before
I read
with
it
House of Leaves.
digitally, you can lock your screen and then you can actually
That's
like
exactly
physically
what
turn
I
the
did.
device.
so
I
I'm
locked the
curious.
screen, put it on a horizontal surface. So I read it on a table while I'm sitting there on a chair. And so then I can just slide the corner around as I'm reading it.
Oh, I meant physically, like screen lock it and then just turn the whole device over. Because that's how I would have
did that at first, and it got very cumbersome. Because then
because then you're turning the pages the wrong way.
Your smart cover would like flip over and like hit you in the arm and stuff.
Oh, so yeah, you're having the same problem as you would with a physical book. I don't cover mine like that, so I could see just being like spinning it on the kitchen table, being like, ha ha ha.
And that's what
I have conquered you. Trillium.
That's what I ended up doing. Was I just screen locked the rotate so it couldn't on its own, and then I would spin it around as needed.
Gotcha.
For me, reading it in the physical format, because a lot of those things where it's like one part is upside down and the other part's not, the reason why that's important is because they're happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm reading a book and it says like, meanwhile, or anything like that, it doesn't feel like that to me. It's separate. It's something that's happening.
It's linear still. Yeah. That happens after.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can keep telling myself that, oh, this is happening at the same time, but I don't feel like it. Having that physical action of like having to turn the entire book around and then go back and read it made it feel like it was happening at the same time, because I could also see underneath it what was happening simultaneously, even though it was upside down.
And all the panels were exact mirrors of the ones above and below.
In an interesting way, though, because there's another book that did the mirroring panels, and it's the Zartan special issue of G.I. Joe Cobra. Because it's the two brothers, right? Tomat and Zamak. Yeah. What are they named?
Zamat and Tomac.
Tomax. Something like that. Zamak. Anyway, I don't know anything about G.I. Joe. Except for the book G.I. Joe Cobra, which I love. But there's that one issue where they laid out all the panels like they're a direct mirror from front to back. And I liked that it was more of mirroring elements within the panel. Like when you see the spacesuit in the bottom panel, it's also represented in the above panel. It's more of like a kind of a... it's not a direct mirror, but it's like they're referencing each other.
Well, they're having similar experiences at the same time.
Right.
Tomax and Zeman.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't
know anything about G.I. Joe. I'm sorry.
And the actual like physical moving of the books, because I ended up reading it in the digital copy. I'm like moving my computer, and it was awful. But
is this because Joe took too long to read it?
Well, yeah. Okay, so Kaylee was going to take it, and then Joe was like, "No, I'll read it." I'm just like, okay, and then it sat in his car for a week, and then Kaylee had to read it, and then I had to read it, but I couldn't read it, so I had to...
So what you're saying is it's all Joe's fault?
Essentially.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure that was on the air.
It's always Joe's fault.
I mean, we know
pretty
this.
much, yeah. But, like, one thing that they do, aside from having you switch it, is, like, the coloring around the pages are different colors. Like, her stories are usually blue, where his are red. So that also kind of helps with, like, having them be different stories.
I thought there was a lot of cool thematic ideas in here.
Oh yeah.
I'm sort of on the side of people who commented on the Facebook saying like maybe a different artist would have lent something different to it, because I look at Descender and I go, that
Descender does that a lot.
That book is an absolutely phenomenal book, and it is Jeff Lemire's great writing with Dustin Nguyen's amazing art, and I'm like, well, maybe if that had been Trillium, like I would have dug this book more, but I still think it's an enjoyable experience. And as far as sci-fi comics go, I think it is unique in a lot of ways amongst them, despite sharing a lot of elements with them.
Well, I think it's always important that these things are done because the medium needs to continue to be tested always. I mean, there's plenty of art house film that I'm just like, yawn or blah or ick. And then there's plenty that I'm like, oh, wow, yay. Yeah. And then you find out that the only reason that exists is because 3 years earlier somebody made, a movie with only mauve filters on it or some weird thing, and you're like, oh, I guess that weird thing had to exist for this other thing to come. So
exactly,
that's why I'm always so moderate about things, because I'm like, well, it could be
and that's
possibly for someone.
It's a thing I talk about a lot with. You never know who you're going to influence or who's going to be influenced by you. Is like, I made the show because I was influenced by other podcasters. I hope to influence somebody else to start a show. Like, I hope that happens someday. And so you don't know what you're going to influence somebody to do.
Right.
I think it's just important to put out the stuff that you want to put out and know that, maybe it doesn't need to be like cosmically important at the moment, but
know that
you're creating some ripples in a pond that maybe someday will be a tidal wave.
Yeah. And some guy in Olympia, Washington might be like, meh, meh, meh. And you'll be like, meh, whatever.
Yeah, It's not like Jeff Lemire just gives a shit about what we say. He doesn't, but.
Don't remind me.
Yeah.
I cry softly into my pillow every night that, Senpai hasn't noticed. So,
This has gotten extremely awkward.
Yeah, it is.
So there was...
No,
Okay,
I
go ahead.
was just going to jump in. There were a couple things I noticed that haven't been touched upon yet.
Yeah, go for it.
One is the details of the art. We talked about the art in general, but there were some very fine details in the art that I really liked, such as when they switch places, the face paint goes from Nika to William.
And it switches sides.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very, very, very cool. The vehicles I thought were very well designed. I noticed that in the trade, as Kaylee was flipping through it, there's actually design sketches. I thought that was really neat because those are very...
totally remind me of Gundam, which made me really happy.
It's like all the colonial ships and stuff in
Yeah.
Gundam. Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I like that the rover that she drives around to get out to the
that's
temple
the one
with like
I'm
the cool
specifically
tiny wheels.
thinking of. I just thought, how cool would it be to just build one of those and then just go bomb around in the desert? That'd be amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. I like
Finding
how,
like flowers and stuff.
I think that just mentioning the designs, everything looks I don't want to say real because that's like a really shitty term to describe stuff. And it's not believable either. It's just like it looks like it exists, I guess. Like this is a thing that could be a thing. And I think that's what makes that rover driving thing look so cool is because you're just like, I want one of those. Like that's real, right? I can go buy one from the store. I think the designs are really clever on a lot of that stuff.
Anybody have any thoughts out of curiosity about the shifts between the watercolor kind of pages and scenes and then these really super flat, clear sort of images? Like that's something that actually just occurred to me now, looking through things. And so you've got, I wish, obviously, not a visual medium, podcasting, but it's interesting to kind of look through some of these sections that are really, really flat. Mm-hmm. The colors are very, very flat,
and
very,
the
very
tint
simple.
changes too. They're less earth tone. They're more, they're more blues, more gray. Like they're not as warm.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm looking at an actual transition here in art style that occurs at the point that Nika finds herself.
Well, she thinks she's
at
inside
the
of the black hole, right?
Yeah, and so she walks into, herself guides her to the black hole, which, interesting enough, I notice now is in the very, very feminine part of the statue.
It's a statue vagina. Is what you're
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
say.
yeah. That's,
Okay.
I was going to be delicate because I'm known
No.
for my delicacy, but
Right.
it's, she walks into this, and as they're getting to this part where she's entering the black hole, like the next set of panels on the next page is William peeking down into the pyramid, or the ruins of the pyramid, and switches back immediately to this really soft, like watercolor sort of thing here.
Thematically, she thinks she's inside of the black hole. She says, I think I was in the black hole. And that's part of the reason, the impetus for her and William floating into it at the end is like, I was inside of there. It wasn't so bad. And I think that definitely like the universe, the Earth Mother, the black hole, the statue vagina, like all of that is related in some way to like a portal to another place. So Charles Byrne in the book Black Hole shows a lot of pictures of like galaxies next to like wounds and also like vagina shaped things a lot. And I always like,
So does HR.
yeah, it's like, well, H.R. Geiger's just got like,
Yeah,
or Giger, there's just like penises going into vagina for like 20 years in his stuff. But I mean, it's great, but
And penises coming out of penises. And
yeah, just
Never
infinite
have enough.
loops and all that stuff. I think I understand thematically what they're going for with that, but it seems like it's a recurring theme in a lot of people's stuff, and each person kind of means something different with that imagery. So who knows?
Okay, so the only other thing was that I felt the overarching story was short.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were definitely character journeys taken, but in the big scheme of things, not a lot happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I don't know, in some ways I found that was kind of cool because it focused more on the character journeys, but for some parts of it just really pissed me off. I wanted to know more. And I wanted a bigger story. I wanted more stuff to happen. And for 8 issues, I was just like, not a lot happened.
It's a very quick read. Like, there's a lot going on, but it doesn't feel overly dense or plotting anywhere. Like, it never just, like, slowly slogs along. Like, it just kind of, like, moves all the time. And I think that because it is a visual medium, it uses the visual language to represent that a lot of time has passed. Because you just mentioned, like, oh, it's only, like, a couple hours. But, like, they live several lifetimes in those hours.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess one of the things that was just occurring to me as Kate was talking was, like, I think it's harder to set ambiance in the same ways when you control the pace of the medium.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I say that all the time.
Like, I think that if we were forced to experience time on the various scales that it's intended in the book, we would feel differently. You know, I know a movie that Joe's mentioned many times, and I feel similarly about it, is Solaris.
Yeah.
Which is an exceptionally long movie, but also has a lot of aspects of, like, this notion of, like, living another life or referring to another life, or, you know, this temporal shifting type stuff. And yeah.
Well, mediums where you give up control of narrative pace, like a film or television, for example, is like you very much give up all the control to what's happening in front of you. But comics and there are other mediums that we don't need to get into at the moment, but they're one where you do control the pace in some way. And it is, I think, harder sometimes to control or to convey ideas when you as an author, artist, have given up some of the control to the reader because you don't know how much time they're going to spend looking at a panel.
I will note that reading this digitally, the distinction between the coloring styles is actually not nearly as apparent as it is now that Kit's pointing it out to me on paper.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Texture plays a role in that I think.
I didn't notice them.
Well, it's like one of the things with his watercolors is they're very, you know, you see where water pools and gutters and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Ethereal.
you know, it's you get these like chunks and clusters of where pigment
That sounds so unappealing. Chunks and clusters. Like you vomited all over the
That sounds
page.
unappealing. That sounds like the best breakfast cereal ever.
I mean, I don't know what
It's all
sort of
about
prize you get in that situation.
Chunks and
You know, what's the
clusters.
bottom of the cereal box there? Yikes! But
I don't know.
I don't know. You get these huge like pools of pigment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And things like that, and then you get these voids, like pools and voids, and that's interesting too. Again, just with what you're dealing with. Again, in the story, the spottiness of time and space and memory and all these things. One of the people that I was looking through reviews as well, and somebody brought up the question of, oh well, I'm not sure if he's trying to make this a case of like doubtful mental state or things like that, or
like
make
a like unreliable narrator type
yeah,
situation,
and like I'm not really sure where they're getting that other than the fact that anytime you present any kind of magical plant in any kind of story, the first thing anyone ever thinks of is drugs and drug use, things like that.
Well, I think there's a relatively long history of using war as a gateway device towards unreliable narration. PTSD. I mean, you know, the most glaring one science fiction wise being, I think, Slaughterhouse-5. But there being other instances of it being like pointing at people who have experienced that kind of severe trauma as being unreliable because they can't trust themselves because of their own issue. But yeah, I think I read something similar and I was like, I'm not quite so convinced. Because it wasn't like, I mean, he certainly seemed to have like character doubts maybe based on it, but it wasn't like
Well, she has doubts when she's living in Victorian England,
Right.
because once time has been rewritten, after she comes back out of the climbing out of the pyramid, she's like, I remember everything about growing up in that time period, but I also remember everything about being a space scientist. Like, she can still fly the ship because she's like, well, even though you just saw me in like Victorian clothes or whatever, like, she remembers both lives. And so there's a part of like unreliability of like, well, which life was real with both of them.
Sorry, I snapped really loud, and that probably got picked up on the mic.
I'm
I
sure
was
it did.
trying to remember what other science fiction thing I was tickling my brain about that particular
Event Horizon.
Event Horizon, also Fringe.
Oh, yeah.
Has that happen where Olivia is like
Going into the fringe to figure it out.
well, no, like they remember at one
She
point.
wears jackets with a lot of fringe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what that show's about, right?
Yeah.
I've never
Yeah.
seen it.
But at one point, she remembers both. I think it's Olivia. It might be Jack. I don't know. Anyway, one of the characters remembers both their current existence and its history, and gets flashes and knowledge of the other reality from which they came from.
Yeah, it's come up in other stuff.
Yeah.
For sure.
But it's one of those things where it's like I could remember the general concept, but I couldn't point at any specific example.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where I get the like unreliability from. I don't know that detrimentally affects the story, but
Yeah.
I think that there's part of that. It's like, what is real? I think that is in there. I think a lot of that too comes from his kind of, it's not quite surreal moments, but moments where the page is turning and you're traveling through time and all these kind of like, what exactly happened? Like, we don't quite know why time rode over itself. The temple blew up, but like, how does that affect time? Like, I think that there's enough of those concepts in there that you kind of doubt how any of it's happening.
I kind of bring up that person's comment for a reason of Cade's comment about pacing from the story and being like, well, you know, not a whole lot. A lot kind of happens, but not a whole lot happens in plot. I think that further serves to reinforce the idea that we aren't dealing with a space opera book. We're not dealing with like a hard sci-fi, you know, sort of situation, which is, I bring that up to kind of prod again at that question of like, how much information do you need to know if you're not having this sprawling sci-fi epic, if what you're having instead is more like a mental journey that is set in a science fiction premise or world rather, not really. Yeah, premise too, but yeah, I don't know.
For sure.
Yeah.
Did anybody have anything else they wanted to say about Trillium, or should we move on to recommendations? Cade, what would you like to recommend this week?
So I brought a controversial book.
Ooh.
But I have to start it out with a story
All right.
about my past. The old guy's doing story time now.
I'm excited.
I have a hot chocolate. I'm ready.
So I grew up with two gay parents. Well, my mom came out when I was very, very young, and then my dad came out years later. But the LGBT lifestyle was always embraced in my household, and my parents always found very eclectic things for us to read or to watch or what have you. And one of the books that I actually grew up with was a comic started in 1983 and could be my first actual comic that I ever read. I'm not entirely sure since I was very, very young. And that was Dykes to Watch Out For. I notice a couple people know what that is. And I mean, looking back, I can't believe my parents ever let me read this stuff. But recently, as in like a month ago, it was one of her newer books was in the news because it's on a college recommended reading list. And many people are saying that it's pornographic, even though it touches on some very realistic things that have happened. So the author is Alison Bechdel, and the book I'm recommending is called Fun Home. And it's a family tragicomic because it is quite sad. It's a very personal look at her growing up, her family, particularly her dad.
Who is not really a spoiler, but he was a closeted gay man.
Yes. And then she came out of the closet while she was in college.
Right.
And didn't know that he was homosexual. And it created some very interesting things.
Also, book preface, not fun. The fun and fun home is short for funeral because her dad was like a funeral embalmer.
Yes.
So there's like a lot of death in the book too.
Yeah, that was
fantastic, though.
one of the places she would play as a kid was inside the funeral home.
And they called it the fun home.
Called it the fun home because it was fun to go play in the funeral home.
It's a great book, though. We talked about it on Out of the Fridge, and I loved it.
Did you?
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, it's pretty great. It does have one page that could be considered pornographic because it does have depictions of lesbian sex.
Yeah.
But
it's an autobiographical comic, though. I mean, like...
It is.
You know, people do it.
Well,
Sex,
yes.
not autobiographical comic. Not everyone writes an autobiographical comic.
Everyone.
I realized that was unclear.
Yes. Disclaimer, people have sex because people are people.
Yes. It's a good disclaimer.
But yeah, I thought it would be interesting to talk about, the controversy surrounding the book. It's pretty old by this point. It's almost 9 years old.
Yeah.
But it's been in the news very recently.
Yeah, this is a book I always point to, too, because in bookstores very often you find this book in the autobiography section and not with graphic novels, which I think is like a massive stride for a comic book kind. It's not like, go play in the corner over there.
It's on a recommended reading list for a very high-level university. I mean, this is a book that college professors feel needs to be talked about, and I think that gives it merit on its own.
That's a really good book. I mean, people should check it out. It's not black and white, but it is line art, and it's non-colored line art, because I think it's blue now in this printing. It's like blue and white.
The one I read was black and white.
Okay.
But
there might be a new printing now. I don't remember.
I have no idea. I don't even know what edition I read.
Maybe I just read a very faded copy. Yeah.
It's been out in the sun for a while. Printed blue.
Kaylee, what did you want to bring this week?
So I've pitched it recently, and I'm bringing it back because certain people aren't on, so I think it'll have a higher chance of getting picked.
The politics.
The patented Brant method of bringing it back.
Bring it back. Bring it.
So it's Madame Xanadu by Matt Wagner.
Thank goodness I didn't bring
ones
that
and
to pitch
twos.
tonight, because I almost did.
It follows Madame Xanadu from her, I guess not her beginnings, because she's been around for like 100, 200, 300 years or whatever before this starts, but the start of her journey as Madame Xanadu, and ties in a lot with like the Vertigo universe. The art is absolutely gorgeous.
And the DC universe too.
Well,
both, yeah.
Yeah. The art is absolutely gorgeous. Brings in a lot of characters I really love. It has the Spectre makes an appearance. Constantine makes an appearance. Death makes an appearance. Hundreds others. And it's just good. It's just plain good. And I want to read it. And I want to talk about it. And I want to talk about how good it is.
Boom. Done.
That's my pitch.
Akirba, what do you want to read this week?
So I brought. Oh shoot! I dropped my phone.
It's okay though. I think, right?
It
looks fine.
I'll look at it later. I don't want to be disappointed right now. So I brought two, and I brought the first two volumes because I guess if we want, we could just read the first one. But
I'll bring the first two. Why not?
Yeah, I brought
It's
the
only
first.
like 10 issues, right?
Yeah, and And the second one, the reason why I brought the second one is for three things. It introduces his brother, and it introduces, I forgot his name, but there's like a chicken that is like really important.
Yeah.
He's really important. And
he's like a cockfighting chicken.
Yeah, and he's like the best, and
he has his own solo issue that is one of the best standalone issues I've ever read of anything. It has like almost nothing to do with Chew, but the chicken goes on like this magical adventure to another world and like fight. It's like a fantasy where he like has to fight this evil wizard, and you need to, if you haven't read that issue, you need to get it.
I'll find it.
It's fucking amazing.
Yeah, I've just been buying the trade, so
was it
doing that.
Polio?
Yeah,
Polio,
it's like
Polio Loco or something.
Yeah, it was funny because I was about to be like, isn't it like El Diablo? But yeah, Polio.
Yeah. And then also it has a cool like fight scene where he's in an elevator. But pretty much it's about if you don't know, it's about like an investigator, and he has this thing. It's called like Chibopath.
He's a Chibopath.
Chibopath, and so that means that when he eats things, he can relive its life. It's like every single feeling it's ever felt, and so because of this, he only eats beets.
Right,
And
which they don't like impart any knowledge into him.
Yeah, they're just beets, and the art in it's really, really good. Like, it's super stylized, and we were kind of talking about pacing before. I think this book encourages a specific type of pacing when you read it that I think is very appropriate. Yeah. Also, like, there's a cool narrator, and whenever I read the narrator, it's in Nick Offerman's voice in my head, so that's fun for me.
Yeah, the art's very like animatorly, like cartoon. Like they have exaggerated features, and the color's very like, like high def color. Yeah, that's what I call it. Like very. It's very. Yeah, like this color. It's good color. Yeah, I'm not describing that well. Is it being turned into an
animated series?
It was in talks to be turned into a live action series. I would have rather seen that.
With the same people as like iZombie is what I read. The same people that
so they're going to change his name and like have nothing to do with anything. Okay.
Yeah. So Kirby mentioned he's a Chibopath. What she did not mention though was avian bird flu has made chicken illegal.
Oh yeah, that's the important part.
No one can eat chicken, and so he works for the FDA tracing illegal chicken smuggling.
That's right. Okay, sorry, it's been a while since I knew there was something with the chickens.
I mean, that's important. But.
Yeah, and like pretty much every story arc is like they found a new chicken. They're turning frogs into chickens. They're like
there's a plant that tastes like chicken.
Yeah,
and vampires. Yeah, it's really fun. I like this a lot.
It's a good book, and it's one that's been brought a lot. I have yet to vote for it, though, because I feel like it would make an exceptional long run.
Yeah, I don't know. I keep trying to read it all in one read, and every time I get to like trade 4 or 5, I like get distracted by something else. So.
Yeah, I read up to trade 6, which is really gnarly, and I was like, I need to not like I think I'm okay for a while. But
it's a very bloody series.
It is. It's kind of gross too. Like just the art in it sometimes is gross, but it's kind of counteracted with like
mouths are gross. And he uses his mouth a lot.
He has to eat a lot of gross stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things I really like too is he's in love with this girl who I can't remember what they call it, but she has a special power where she can write things, and when you read her writing about like food, you can like taste the food in your mouth and stuff. So I really like how like he can't eat food, but he's in love with someone who can kind of like bring that to him, and he's like, yeah,
it's cute.
Yeah, it's cute in a very gross book.
Yeah.
So yeah,
there's some cuteness in there. I love his partner, his detective partner guy.
Oh yeah, who's like, I'm
I
not
don't
want to say that.
I don't want to spoil anything. I was like,
so I can't really say something anything. Happens to him.
But he's a very cool character.
Yeah.
Kit, what would you like to recommend this week?
I bounced between like 1,000 things, and usually I'm the person that goes like, this is an opportunity to like shove vertigo into people's eyes.
Do it.
Because that's what I always do. But actually, I just keep thinking about this book, and I lent it to Kirby, and so I don't know why I keep thinking about it. I just do. It's Daredevil Dark Knights. And I like me some Daredevil stories. And so this particular one, it has basically the main story is about one of the many times that Daredevil is out in a snowstorm and can't really use his powers as well, because that happens to the guy a lot. You think he'd move, right?
Yeah.
Maybe if he moved to, say, California instead. Wait.
He moved back then.
Yeah. So basically, snowstorm, he's out, as Matt, doing his Matt stuff, and he's mugged, and he ends up in a hospital and is slowly trying to recall who he is, just based on the senses that he has in the hospital, and overhears about this transplant that was supposed to be coming for a girl, and in the snowstorm, the helicopter was downed, and it's through hearing about this heart that this girl needs that he remembers who he is in the hospital and goes, I have to go out and do this. And it becomes a redemptive action for him and gives him an opportunity to think about those usual sad, dark Daredevil things of, Karen, why, and all that stuff. But I like it because this one, it feels more meaningful and less just raking poor Matt over the coals like everyone loves to do. And so this little mini story is called Angels Unaware, and it leans pretty heavily on his Catholic upbringing and guilt and thoughts about what he wants to do with his life for the people that he wasn't able to do things for, and how he can look forward and try to learn from his mistakes. I think it's one of my favorite Daredevil stories that I ever read. Some of the later stuff in that trade is a little less glorious, I would say. But I think the first story more than makes up for it, and just thinking about Daredevil too much. So there you go. Daredevil Dark Knights, maybe. Shrug.
Cool. Sure.
Ringing endorsement with a shrug.
Brant, what would you like to bring this week?
Sorry, I got caught up in trying to figure out who wrote Dark Knights.
Oh, Lee Weeks.
Lee Weeks.
Sorry about that. I forgot that
No,
part.
it's fine.
Yeah.
Friend of the show and coworker of mine, Lindsay Carr, recently tweeted and asked me about good Rick Remender reads, and I gave her some, and it reminded me that there was a series that I really wanted to read that I haven't yet that I thought I would pitch, which is The End League, by Rick Remender from Dark Horse. It's 9 issues, but
I haven't read this one.
Basically, the plot is supervillains won, and the JLA is all that's left. Actually, the initial premise is Lex Luthor manages to convince Superman, or in this case, Astonish Man, to commit a series of grave acts that accidentally release a giant explosion that throws the Earth off axis and gives a bunch of people superpowers who decide to use all of their abilities to do bad things. So it's kind of alternate Earth meets, how do the last few people who have any kind of redemptive qualities to themselves use their powers to fight the good fight.
Is this like 2 trades?
Yeah.
Oh, I have it. Okay, I have read parts of this. All right.
Yeah. So originally created with Matt Broom, who left after the first 5 issues, and then Eric Canete, Canete, I think I've talked about him before, took over. Remender ended up wrapping up the series because he took on an exclusive contract with Marvel, but it was getting many plaudits and was coming out to some enthusiasm, and I've been enjoying Rick Remender's work, and I thought, hey, superhero stuff with a twist. That's my deal. So
yeah, I've been meaning to go and actually read the whole series on this one. So.
Yeah. So
very cool. Well, as many people may know, I love Mike Mignola. I love his writing. I love his art. I love the Mignolaverse. I love BPRD. I would love to talk about all 100 and whatever issues of all that. But we did that on Out of the Fridge. We did Mignola May. And we talked about all those, and I read all of that. And so I have a hard time pitching Mignola books on Views because I don't know what's a good place to start, because everything kind of leads into something more. But there is a series that is not part of the Hellboy Mignolaverse that I think is some of the best work that he's ever worked on. Several years ago, he wrote a novel called Baltimore, which is about a guy who awakened this ancient vampire race on accident, laying in the trenches. So yeah, he's laying in the trenches. It's World War I. Everyone is dead. He wakes up because he didn't die, and there are these giant bat monsters eating all of the corpses. And there's one right next to him, and he's like, what the? And he just stabs him in the, like, scratches his face in the eye. And that action of violence kind of reawakens their more intelligent part of their brain, because they had kind of, like, slipped back into this monstrous state, and they're able to kind of, like, snap back into being kind of the Vlad the Impaler type Dracula, where they are human sometimes and bats sometimes, rather than just this monstrous thing. And they're like, Baltimore, damn you, you cursed us, so we're going to kill your family and fuck up a whole bunch of shit and deal with it. And he's like, all right, I'm going to deal with it by hunting vampires for the rest of my life. So the novel came out, and then he went back and wrote prequel comics, which is the series Baltimore. I'm recommending the first 2 trades, the first 4 trades of which all take place before the book, and then trades 5 and 6 now are continuing the story that he started in the novel. And so Baltimore 1 and 2 is dope. It's vampires, vampire hunter.
Dope.
It's dope. He's got a peg leg, which he like drives nails into, and there's like very to represent like people he's let down. I think is what it is.
Not each vampire he's killed.
No, that would be a lot of nails. But it's weird. It's a cool series. It has a lot of the elements that I like about the Hellboy verse.
He doesn't draw it all, does he?
No, but it is not. I mean, he draws some of it, I think, but because the book was an illustrated novel, so it had like pages that were drawings. But it has a lot of the stuff that I like about the Hellboy verse, but it is not related to the Hellboy verse, even though it so easily could be and totally should be folded in, and it would be cool. All right, but that's my personal fantasy. But it's a great series, and I really like it. If you're looking for a good start into the Mignola stuff, and you don't want to dive into 200 issues of Hellboy and BPRD and all of Abe Sapien and all of that stuff, right? You should read that. But if that seems daunting, I would recommend starting with Baltimore. It's really good. I like it. Check it out.
He also has another series, Joe Golem, which is really good.
Yeah.
So if you read Baltimore,
You like it so much, why didn't you pitch it, Kaylee?
Because it's not graphic novel; it's an illustrated novel, and that's not the show.
Because she was busy marrying.
This is something I've thought a lot about.
Excellent.
Yeah, boom.
Yeah. So
Mrs. Kaylee Fleeland.
Can you come back to me? I need to look something up, actually.
Sure. Kaylee, what do you want to read?
This is like the first week in a really long time that I actually really want to vote for everything.
Is that a slight at everybody else and our pitches from the weeks before?
Oh, no. Usually there's one
Kaylee.
or two where I'm like, I don't feel like reading DC or whatever. It's less a slight against you guys and more a slight against the publishing houses.
It's fair.
But Kirby has been pitching Chew to me for probably about 3 years. So I'm going to vote for that.
Sweet. Kerbo, what do you want to read?
It was between Cade's book and Kaylee's book. And it sounds like Kaylee has an opportunity today. So I'm going to go with hers.
One for Madame Xanadu.
I've never not wanted to read anything Vertigo related, especially if I've read it before. But I would be excited to force everyone to talk about Madame Xanadu because it's fucking great, okay? I don't know why you haven't already.
I don't know, it's fantastic. Brant, what would you like to read this week?
I almost brought Madame Xanadu for 2 weeks, and then I didn't come to the show, so let's do Madame Xanadu.
Cade, how would you like to vote?
He's still busy looking something up, Chard.
We're out of people, though, Brant. I can't stop anymore.
No. It's awkward silence. Just awkward silence.
I can cut that silence out.
No, let's put in elevator music.
Okay.
Kate,
my vote was torn between Xanadu and Baltimore, and I needed to look up something about Baltimore before I voted for it.
Wasn't sure about its pedigree.
Well, it's because I've read part of it, but I couldn't remember what we would be talking about. And my other choice that I was going to vote for was Xanadu, but since it has 2 votes already, I'm going to vote for Baltimore.
It is 3 votes already.
Oh,
Yeah.
Bam.
Okay.
So,
You can't win.
well, well, I want to give Baltimore a vote because it's a really good book.
yeah, I love it. I think it's sweet. Yeah, I mean, my vote doesn't really matter.
Your vote
I
always
suppose.
matters. That's democracy.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. But for the record, that Daredevil book sounded awesome, and I have never read that one. So there you go. That's what I'm going to vote for. So next week, we will be reading how much of Madame Xanadu?
The first 2 trades.
All right, there you go. It's only 4 trades total, right?
Yeah.
It's only, I think, like 25 issues.
Should we not?
23, something
Should we
like
not do all 4?
We can do all 4.
Yeah, let's do it.
that. So good.
Let's
It's
do
such a
it.
quick read.
Let's read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Just down
Well,
that
just-
slippery slope.
Why not just read every Vertigo book?
That's
Everything
what
with
I've
Madame
been saying. All of them.
Yeah, every appearance of Madame Xanadu for next week. That's your homework, kids. No, we're just reading. We're reading the Vertigo series from, I think it was like 2010, 2007. Oh,
2007.
okay.
Yeah, every Vertigo
Earlier
book.
than I thought.
13 trades.
But still
Bullets,
pretty
13
recent.
trades of-
It's only 4 trades.
No. I'm saying
Okay.
every Vertigo book. That's
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a lot.
Do
That's
it
too
forever.
many. But yeah, so we'll be reading that. And thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you for everyone who supports us. And we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Me From the Gutters. I hope our recommendations have inspired you to go out and find some new comics you'll enjoy. Join us next time for a discussion of our selected title. But like every week, we encourage you to read all of the recommended books. In the meantime, please leave us an iTunes review. It really does help new listeners find the show. You can also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us on Twitter at ViewFRTHGutters. Feel free to email us at contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Please send us any questions, comments, or recommendations you might have. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we post new videos every week. And thanks again for listening. And as always, keep reading.